Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This video will be a review of Kino Lorber's second Blu-ray of the 1937 screwball classic, Nothing Sacred, starring Fredric March and the incomparable Carole Lombard, directed by the great William Wellman, written by Ben Hecht, and produced by David O. Selznick. This was very much the follow-up to what Wellman and Selznick had done in the same year previously on the 1937 original version of A Star is Born. Both films are Technicolor classics, and both have been stuck in public domain hell in terms of crappy transfers and terrible presentations over the years. So after I got to look at the beautiful Warner restoration of A Star is Born, it felt natural to finally look at what is technically the best available version of Nothing Sacred. Unfortunately, this is not a full catalog overhaul restoration, and so the film still really needs the very intensive and expensive work process that A Star is Born has finally received. Now, to talk a little bit about the film, William Wellman is not necessarily somebody you think of in terms of his comedies, but he really did have a great sense of comedic timing. You see this in the comedic sequences and scenes, even in A Star is Born, and Nothing Sacred being a technicolor film made for David O. Selznick, starring or co-starring Fredric March. It's sort of that sort of follow-up because Wellman did have another film on his contract with Selznick, and it's also a sort of outlier because Selznick didn't really go in for comedies. So this is sort of one of those rare Selznick films under his production banner, so under the Selznick Studios banner, that wasn't very melodramatic or had the Selznick stamp on it or was a classic literary adaptation. So it definitely is an outlier in that sense, and it's also an early Technicolor film still. So it has a lot of the same challenges that bringing the original Star is Born to disc has. The film is a screwball classic and was written primarily by Ben Hecht, except for the ending that was tacked on and changed. So it has a ridiculous pace to it, and it's really scathing and it's extremely satirical when you look at it. So to say it is simply a screwball comedy is selling the film short. To say it's a black comedy or a satirical comedy barely gets into the sort of mass attack on not just the newspaper industry and journalism, but society at large. Hecht does not limit his scope of who he's attacking with his scathing satire. But basically the plot in a nutshell, and this is like any great screwball comedy, what gets the ball rolling and allows the hilarity to ensue is essentially that the down on his luck reporter, played by Fredric March, has basically not necessarily done the best reporting job, and so his newspaper has gotten revealed as promoting a complete hoax. So then he gets demoted to the obituaries department in a brilliantly staged bit of physical comedy where he's shoved in between filing cabinets and is just being trampled by people and gets water dumped on his hat and everything. And I think that scene alone shows you just how incredibly good William Wellman was at physical comedy, which is something he doesn't really get a lot of credit for, because, again, you think of William Wellman, you think of Beau Guest, you think of The Public Enemy, you think of these really macho films, but yet he could also do very intimate dramas like A Star is Born, or complete flat-out wacky black comedy farces like Nothing Sacred. So anyway, the March reporter then seizes upon a small public interest story to spin into not only getting his paper back on track, but getting his career back on track and getting him out of the obituary department. And this involves the little story about a small town doctor diagnosing this poor girl, Hazel Flagg, played by Carole Lombard, with deadly radium poisoning, and she has very little time left to live. So it's essentially a way to sell a lot of papers and get his career out of the dumps. Of course, the small town doctor is, to put it in polite terms, a complete quack, and the diagnosis is completely fake, but poor Hazel Flagg has had her heart set on being able to maybe get a trip out of New York to it. So when March's reporter shows up and happens to mention that he would take her to New York and everything, she gets to get all excited again and go to New York, and then the charade just continues until it reaches dizzying heights and everything is about to implode. When, of course, it is going to at some point be revealed that she is actually not dying of radium poisoning. So it's got a very dark edge to it, and again, it's Ben Hecht taking on not just the newspaper industry but society at large, because of course everybody buys into this story and commiserates over her sad tale. So it's sort of the human interest story taken writ large, and the newspaper, of course, the publisher runs rampant with spreading her name everywhere humanly possible. And again, this is just the gist of the setup that gets the story going. And as with any classic screwball comedy, you can kind of tell where it's going to go, but that doesn't matter. The joy is in the journey of getting there. And this film reaches, I'd say it reaches manic heights very, very early. It maintains this sense of energy and it doesn't let it dissipate. So it sort of has a slight tinge of that manic bringing up baby energy that Hawks put into bringing up baby, but it's still got its own core identity. And it's also really nice and revealing to see Frederick March in a completely opposite style role right off of A Star is Born and in another Technicolor film, again for William Wellman. So it's nice to see them sort of get to do a full-out comedy as opposed to only having a few little bits of levity in the otherwise very heavy A Star is Born. But it goes without saying, this is Carole Lombard's picture. This is it's one of the great screwball performances, and it's definitely reignited my love affair with Carole Lombard. And I don't think it's physically possible to see this film and not be madly in love with her screen presence. And by the end of it, if you are not just completely charmed and bowled over by her intensive on-screen energy, you probably don't have a heart. Just go ahead and say it. It's humanly impossible to not be charmed beyond belief when you see her in this film. She said it was one of her favorite roles, and you can definitely get that sense of her really enjoying the byplay with Frederick March and the other actors and what William Wellman was allowing them to do in ramping up this energy. But the character also has a great deal of humanity to her still. It's not just a screwball farce. There is some genuine emotion spread throughout. So there's basically a little bit of dramatic meat on the bones, I think you could say, in terms of the overall story for all the characters and things, which is really the secret of all the best screwball comedies. It's not just 100% wackiness. There is some dramatic undercurrent, and I think Wellman realized this intuitively and made sure to keep that going throughout. So as a story, I think you could maybe draw parallels. I think you definitely could draw parallels to the previous year's Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, except of course instead of it being Gary Cooper, it's Carole Lombard going to town. And also under completely different circumstances, but it's sort of a similar thing where small town individual goes to the big city and it gets all of this hubbub going. But again, the joy of seeing this film is being in on the joke the whole time and wondering how big this is going to go until it finally implodes, and when it does, just what will catch on fire and how will things implode. And it builds to an absolutely iconic moment where the March and Lombard characters essentially are just screaming at each other, and there are some there are some fisticuffs, some wonderful fisticuffs, and some great gags, but that's also how they sold the film in the trailer, the wonderful original trailer that proudly proclaims, "Nothing sacred solves no problems. Nothing sacred doesn't do anything of any importance except entertain you," which it absolutely does. It is a treasure. It is one of the great screwball comedies, and just an absolute joy from start to finish. Now, to talk about the other aspect, which I alluded to before, this film was shot in 3-strip Technicolor. It's still a pretty early Technicolor film, and it was done for Selznick, which means that unfortunately the rights lapsed and it fell into the public domain, and it was reissued many different times in different inferior color formats. So the elements are in really poor shape. It's been subject to innumerable terrible public domain versions, just like the original A Star is Born. And just like that film, Kino's first Blu-ray was sort of a copy of a copy experience, because it was from basically a transfer directly made from an original print, presumably from Selznick's own personal archive. It had a lot of baked-in issues of its own, and so it was just, at least it was an official copy that wasn't completely unwatchable, but it was very, very ropey, and the color was not presented properly in the way that it should, and it was coming from a compromised source, essentially. So that was included as part of Kino's pretty nice Selznick collection box set, which mixed together both their first Blu-rays of Nothing Sacred and A Star is Born, plus some of Selznick's other literary properties. But those two titles still had massive room for improvement. So Kino eventually did, a couple years later, we got the reissue Blu-ray. So in 2018, we got this Blu-ray with this absolutely stunning cover art of Lombard. This is how you differentiate it between, when you're trying to look at the Kino releases, the reissue has this beautiful cover art. It's in their standard style, nice images on the back, and the generic Kino Lorber style layout design. And it credits this as a brand new master from a 2K scan of the restored fine-grained master. Well, that doesn't really explain a lot of stuff, other than this is a new master and it's a different scan and some form of restoration that has gone on. So it's basically different to the first Kino Blu-ray source, and that's why this is a distinct improvement over that. However, I did a little digging, and some people have said this is some sort of ABC, which is what the Selznick library fell under, which is why these are all now technically under the Disney blanket. So that's why if they go out of print, like Fox titles, there's a good chance Disney will not let them out again. So it is said that it's some sort of ABC restoration, and I was finally able to find more information about that. And it's an old interview where the great film historian and preservationist and restorationist Scott McQueen talks about the work they did on trying to restore Nothing Sacred. This was a number of years ago. The article I found seems to be dated 2006, and I will link to it in the description below. And he does go into some pretty great links about the problems this film has had and the problems they ran into, but they were compromised in the process by not having a lot of time and just having to basically do a sort of protection element, which still had a number of issues, particularly in certain reels being extraordinarily damaged or the original negative being gone or unusable, and the original opening titles having to be sourced from a dupe or a copy, which is why you'll still notice on this release the opening titles do look significantly inferior to the rest of the feature. So as far as I can tell, this Blu-ray is made from that particular preservation attempt back a good number of years ago now. So it is unfortunately basing itself on a sort of protection copy that still has a lot of issues baked in, and that's why this does have a lot of those, and they are very obvious. There is a general softness in a lot of places. There is quite a bit of color fringing, which is common to Technicolor films that need restoration work, where the fringing comes where the three elements are not exactly in full registration. But the really big problem is there's a lot of, well, not a lot, but there are a good number of very obvious, very noticeable moments of damage where the frames go completely out of alignment, and you will notice that in at least 3 or 4 different places, and I did take some screen captures of this so you can see that. It doesn't wreck the experience, but this is something that's going to be common to Technicolor films that have not been given the completely stupendous frame-by-frame overhaul that Warner does and has done on the Warner Archive release of A Star is Born. So these make a perfect comparison between a perfect modern digital restoration that's a complete overhaul versus the same sort of film in terms of its production and how it was made, being Selznick, 1937, three-strip Technicolor, same director, that still needs massive work. So that will be very obvious. In addition to the misalignment problems, which is really the biggest issue, there are some instances of definite frame wobble. There are one or two moments where there's a sort of strobing effect. There are intermittent specks and things throughout. You will see the occasional minor line and things like that. It's basically just, this is not a fully restored title. This is still a title that needs massive work. It needs and deserves the same treatment that the original A Star is Born has gotten. It just hasn't gotten that. And unfortunately, now that it's under the Disney banner and has the whole public domain history, it's unlikely that this will be done anytime soon. It's a very time-consuming and expensive process to do, which is why it's so rarely done. That being said, and in spite of all that, this is still by far and away the best I've ever seen the film look, because I've previously only seen the first Kino Blu-ray and all of the god-awful public domain versions that pop up. So I still can recommend this as the best overall version. It is much better than the first Kino Blu-ray, but it still has a lot of major issues because the film has never been fully and painstakingly restored in the way that it should be. So in terms of the picture transfer, it is what it is, but I do think this is the best video quality of any video release of this film. The audio is losslessly encoded. It is the original mono. There is some natural hiss there. Well, I should say there is quite a bit of natural hiss. It is a very noisy track. It does seem like there has been some sort of noise reduction to try and combat that a little bit, because as with most older catalog titles, every time there's dialogue, there's usually a little bit more noise than when there isn't dialogue. But for what it is, it does sound good. I just think this is a title that it's very obvious that this is sort of a compromise and it's the best version that's floating around right now. But this is still a film that needs a full, meticulous 4K restoration. Now, there are some extras included. We get the original Fantastic trailer, which I alluded to before with its very cheeky humor. That is also included in HD, and so you can do a direct comparison between the HD surviving trailer and the rest of the film. So as usual with films that have not been fully restored, comparing them to the trailer can show quite a bit of difference. Then we also got an audio commentary by William Wellman Jr., who talks about the film and his father. Unfortunately, it's one of those commentary tracks that it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. He goes into biographical detail about a lot of the key players, but it's at its best when he's talking about specific memories that he has of both his dad and Carole Lombard. I didn't really get a lot out of it because I had already read his great book about his father, which is literally called Wild Bill Wellman, which is the great and best book about William Wellman if you're wanting to know more information. So I would suggest, if you like this film and you want to know more, definitely go and check his book out. It's really the only great book I'm aware of on William Wellman, and I do still appreciate that he did this commentary, but it's not one that's you're unfortunately going to get a lot out of. But I do appreciate when there is any sort of commentary for a film, because it is getting rarer and rarer to see, and it's not something you see on every Kino release. So if there's any sort of commentary, it's reason to sort of celebrate, because most Kino releases are just whatever master exists, and it is usually a bare bones release, sometimes just with the trailer, sometimes not even with the trailer. So it's in their traditional style. It is just a standard Blu-ray. But of course, I can completely forgive those complaints and this not being as fancy as I wish it was. Understanding the situation with the elements and it not having a full restoration, and of course, it at least has this gorgeous art to just stare at over and over. So this is the release you will want to go for. Unfortunately, it is in the going out of print section of the website, so it is ridiculously cheap now. I think it is under $10. It is a must-own title because, unfortunately, I don't think this film is going to get the restoration it so royally deserves anytime soon, and I don't see Disney putting out another release of this film because they are clueless. This is one of the all-time great screwball comedies. This is one of the classics of William Wellman's career. It is one of the standout Carole Lombard films, and again, you cannot see this film and not have a lifelong love affair with the screen goddess Carole Lombard. This is one of her signature roles, and it is a completely brisk, whimsical, darkly, bitterly hysterical film that has such a dark, cynical punch to it that you just... When I see this film, I'm just cackling like an idiot most of the time because it's got that cynical touch of the incredible legend Ben Hecht, who was a legend and should be talked about in those revered tones and so frequently isn't. But this is just a wonderful film to come back to, and seeing it this way, even though it's still a compromised source, this is easily the best I've ever seen this film look and sound, and it's the best you can do for the time being. So go in understanding it's not going to be a perfectly restored experience, and again, it makes a perfect comparison with the absolutely spellbinding restoration Warner did on the original Star is Born, which again has the same lead actor, same director, same producer, also 3-strip Technicolor, and amazingly made in the same year. So this is yet another example of the golden age of Hollywood where people could literally make two masterpieces almost back to back in the same year, and they are completely different from each other. So it does make a great double feature pairing in terms of, you know, seeing the growth of someone's filmography, but they are completely different films, and Nothing Sacred is absolutely a treasure of the screwball comedy genre. So that's it for this particular review. I do wish I could be more positive about the film getting a proper restoration. Unfortunately, it just hasn't happened. This is really the best it's had in terms of its treatment, and so at least Kino did rectify their first Blu-ray by doing a new disc based on this, I guess you would call it ABC or Disney attempt to make a preservation copy. So again, it was really rewarding finding that Scott McQueen article, because that explained a lot of what you see in this and what I was sort of scratching my head about, because unfortunately Kino just says, oh, some 2K new master and that's it. And you're like, well, then why does it look the way that it does if it's some new master from a fine grain source? So it is what it is, but it is absolutely the best experience you can have with the film, and especially compared to the god-awful presentations it's had over the years. So the first time I saw it, trust me, it looked awful. So it is amazing to at least see it in this level of quality. It does have a commentary, it does have the original trailer, and it is so dirt cheap and has this beautiful artwork. Please grab a copy from Kino's site. It is in their going out of print section, so I heartily recommend everyone interested get a copy before it is gone, because once it goes out of print and it goes back under the Disney banner, it is not likely to be released on disc again in the near future. And this is one of those films you will want to have a copy of, because you will want to revisit this time and time again. It is one of the great classics of the screwball comedy genre. So as always, I just want to say, keep supporting your boutique and studio labels, keep your disc spinning, keep physical media alive, and thanks ever so much for watching.